Time now for another visit with the Story Lady.
Hello, children. I call today's story The Crow and the Pitcher. It was told to me by a nice older man named Aesop. It seems as though there was this crow who was really thirsty, and he came across a pitcher which had once been full of water. However, when the crow put his beak into the mouth of the pitcher, he found that only very little water was left, and he could not reach down far enough to get at it. He tried and tried, but at last had to give it up in despair. Then a wonderful thought came to him, and he took a pebble and dropped it into the pitcher. Then he took another pebble and dropped it into the pitcher, and then another pebble. Well, at last he saw the water mount up near him, and after casting in a few more pebbles, the pitcher was full. Just as the crow was about to quench his thirst, the pitcher, who was a left-handed reliever for the Minnesota Twins, got very irked at all this and punched the crow in the beak.
Thank you, Story Lady. Be listening next time, boys and girls, when the Story Lady tells us the tender story of towel snapping in the Chicago Bears locker room. Time now for another visit with the Story Lady.
Today's story is one I call Horatio Alger, and it goes something like this. Once upon a time, there was a very poor boy named Horatio Alger. Every day he sold newspapers on a corner in New York City. One extremely cold day, a very well-dressed, obviously wealthy gentleman bought a paper from Horatio. But it was so cold, the man hurried off, forgetting his change. Horatio ran after him through the cold and searched all over New York to try and give the man his change. Finally, after nearly freezing to death, Horatio found the man's plush office and ran in to give him his change. That was the beginning of Horatio's success, because he found the man fooling around with his secretary and blackmailed him for the next 35 years.
Thank you, Story Lady. Be listening next time, boys and girls, when the Story Lady tells you the funny fable called Baby Jeffrey and the Magic Fungus. Time now for another visit with the Story Lady.
Hello, boys and girls. Today we're going to hear the story I call Putting the Bell on the Cat. Once upon a time, there were a lot of mice who lived in terrible fear of a huge cat. One night, as they huddled in their mouse hole, one brave mouse said, "We would have nothing to fear if the cat were not so quiet." The mice all agreed to tie a bell around the cat's neck so that whenever the cat was near, they would hear the bell. But who would put the bell around the cat's neck? One little mouse sneaked up on the cat while it was asleep and carefully slipped the bell around the cat's neck. And when it was done, he ran back to the mouse hole and told the others. Soon they heard an approaching bell, and they all laughed, for they were no longer afraid of a stupid cat. But imagine their surprise when moments later they were run over by a berserk good-humored truck.
Thank you, Story Lady. Be listening next time, boys and girls, when the Story Lady will tell us the brief tale of Hugo, the boy who stuck his tongue out at the Luftwaffe. And now for another visit with the Story Lady.
Today I'm going to tell you a story that I'd like to call The Witch's Fudge. Once upon a time, there was a plain-looking scullery maid named Yetta, whose great desire in life was to be beautiful. One day she read an ad in the newspaper about a witch that could perform great magic tricks, and so she took her little brother, little Billy, and went to visit her. "What can I do for you?" said the witch. "I want to be beautiful," replied Yetta. "That's easy enough," boasted the witch. "But what will you give me in return for my services?" "All I have is my brother." "He'll do," answered the witch. "Now take home this plate of magic chocolate fudge and eat it before you go to bed. In the morning you will discover a startling change." Yetta kissed her brother goodbye, went home, ate the fudge, and went to bed. The next morning she bounded out of bed, ran into the bathroom, and looked into the mirror. It certainly was a startling change. Her plain-looking face wasn't plain anymore. It was covered with pimples.
Thank you, Story Lady. Tune in tomorrow, boys and girls, when the Story Lady will sing a medley of 16th century Gregorian chants while drinking a glass of water. And now another friendly visit with the Story Lady.
Hello, children. Today I shall tell you about The Picture of Dorian Gray. Dorian Gray was a wealthy young man with a lot of vanity who decided to have his portrait painted by an artist who was already famous because of his discovery that Rembrandt used chemtone. While Dorian Gray was posing for his picture, a housefly kept buzzing around until finally Dorian caught it in his hand. He was about to crush it when the fly squealed, "Spare my life and you will be forever young. Only your picture will grow old." So Dorian freed the fly and kept his youthful looks. And sure enough, the more he caroused around town, the more hideous his portrait became. 80 years went by, and Dorian Gray still looked young, no matter how he carried on. And he made a lot of money when he sold his secret aging process to Zsa Zsa Gabor.
Thank you, Story Lady. Be with us next time, boys and girls, when the Story Lady will describe the thrill she gets when chickens peck at the toes of her bare feet. Time now for another visit with the Story Lady.
Hello, children. Today's story I call Les Misérables, although I may be wrong. Once upon a time, there was a Frenchman named Jean Valjean, who was not a criminal, but merely an emotionally disturbed personality. When he stole some silver candlesticks, he was condemned to be hanged, but his sentence was later commuted to decapitation. This forced Jean to escape, and as time passed, he became a very rich factory owner. One of his employees was a girl named Cosette, and she was so beautiful that he adopted her right away, and they moved to Paris. It was there that Jean Valjean discovered that Cosette was not exactly the brightest girl around. She was 18 years old and was still blowing soap bubbles in the shape of Marie Antoinette. So, being a loyal Frenchman, what else could he do? He let her eat cake. Get it? Soap, cake? Oh, well.
Thank you, Story Lady. Be with us next time, boys and girls, when the Story Lady will tell us the tender story of the hippie who ate his hair. Time now, boys and girls, for another visit with the Story Lady.
Hello, kiddies. Today we're going to hear the story I call The Laughing King. Once upon a time, in a kingdom far away, there lived a king who started laughing one day and couldn't stop. In desperation, the king offered his beautiful daughter, the princess, to the first person who could make him stop laughing. People with sad stories to tell came from all over the kingdom to try their luck, but nothing happened, and each one of them was beheaded. One day, a filthy slob peasant boy with pimples arrived at the castle and whispered something in the king's ear. Instantly, the king's laughter ceased. One of the royal guards leaned toward the peasant boy and asked, "How did you do it?" "Easy," replied the boy. "I told him the one about the king who gave his beautiful daughter, the princess, to some filthy slob peasant boy with pimples who made him stop laughing."
Thank you, Story Lady. Boys and girls, be with us next time when the Story Lady will eat a gasoline-soaked cabbage. Time now for another visit with the Story Lady.
Hello, children. Today I'd like to tell you the story I call The Elephant Boy. Today's story is about the elephant boy. His name was Corda, and he lived in far-off India. One day, he came upon a wild elephant and captured it. He was finally able to tame the wild beast and make it do his bidding. For 27 years, Corda sat proudly upon the back of the elephant as they went about doing the work of the village, felling huge trees and hunting vicious tigers. One day, Corda dismounted and told the elephant, "Loyal and trustworthy friend, you have served me well these many years, but I have decided to become a holy man, and I will need you no longer. You are hereby given your freedom." The elephant looked at his master for a long moment, and then crushed him with his foot. And had he known his master was a religious nut, he would have done it a whole lot sooner.
Thank you, Story Lady. Be listening next time, boys and girls, when the Story Lady will read cartoons from Playboy magazine. And now, boys and girls, it's time once again for the Story Lady.
Hello, children. Today's story is about Joan of Arc. Joni was a peasant girl long, long ago in France, which had been at war with England for 100 years. When she was 13, she went out hoeing in a field when suddenly she heard a voice. It was a tiny gopher crying, "You have torn up my burrow with your hoe. Please don't hurt me, too." Joan immediately apologized and shared her lunch with him. The gopher said, "You have been so good to me. I'm going to give you a horse and a suit of armor, and you can save France." Instantly, out of a puff of smoke, there appeared a beautiful white stallion and a shining suit of armor made from the finest steel. Joan opened the visor of the helmet and discovered a naked man inside.
Thank you, Story Lady. Next time, boys and girls, the Story Lady will tell us the warm, friendly, and rewarding life of Al Capone. And now, once again, it's time for the Story Lady.
Today, boys and girls, I have a fable called The Toad King. Once upon a time, in the land of Monkey Pod, all toads lived under a very calm and quiet king who never bothered them. And the reason he never bothered them was this: the king was a cucumber, and he just laid there. As time passed, the toads began to find their king a little dull, so they prayed to Hotep, monarch of the gods, to replace their king. And they prayed so often that Hotep removed the cucumber that was king and replaced it with that vicious toad eater, the pelican, who immediately began to gobble up all the toads. Now, this was very alarming, so the surviving toads called an emergency meeting to make plans. It was a dinner meeting, so they had houseflies and spiders and stuff, and they all died of food poisoning.
Thank you, Story Lady. Be listening next time, boys and girls, when the Story Lady will explain why one-way mirrors are your best entertainment. And now, another friendly visit with a Story Lady.
Hello, children. Today's story is one I called Poncho Villa, and it goes something like this. Once upon a time, there lived a brave little boy named Poncho Villa who loved to ride his pony through the countryside. Well, one day, Poncho was trotting through the woods on his favorite pony when he saw a villainous outlaw hold up a train and rob its passengers and kill the engineer and chalk up the sidewalks. At that moment, little Poncho swore to fight for his people. So he studied hard, ate all his supper, and in a very few years rose to become an illiterate peon. In no time, he managed to return to the land of the poor and give everybody who wanted one a sparse education. When news of his successful reforms reached President Diaz in the National Palace, he was so impressed that he had Poncho executed.
Thank you, Story Lady. Next time, boys and girls, the Story Lady will describe the National Championship Gila Monster races. Once again, it's time for the Story Lady.
Hello, children. Today I'll tell you about Billy the Kid. Billy the Kid was a cowboy who didn't like settlers and sheepmen because they kept putting up barbed wire fences and spoiling the range for cattle. So Billy was hired to kill those people using a rifle that fired a slug the size of a gherkin. Of course, he was bound to get into trouble breaking the law that way. And sure enough, the sheriff pulled out his subpoena and arrested Billy. Well, Billy the Kid couldn't stand the idea of being caged up in prison, so he shot the sheriff 21 times in the Adam's apple, moved to New York, and became a hairdresser.
Thank you, Story Lady. Be with us next time, boys and girls, when the Story Lady will tell us the story of the smart-mouthed kid who got shot with a BB gun. And now, another friendly visit with the Story Lady.
Hello, children. Today I'll tell you the story of Bonnie and Clyde. Bonnie and Clyde were happy-go-lucky boys and girls who liked cars and music and bright clothes and banks. But like many high-spirited young people, once in a while they would get involved in a shame. They wore funny costumes so that people wouldn't recognize them. But after a while, grown-ups got jealous of all the good times they were having. So Bonnie and Clyde moved to Hollywood, began selling maps to movie stars' homes, changed their names to Sonny and Cher, and now live like millionaires, although occasionally one of them has a compulsive urge to think.
Thank you, Story Lady. Be with us next time, boys and girls, when the Story Lady will tell us why the decline and fall of the Roman Empire was due to tough luck. And now, boys and girls, another timely visit with a story lady.
Hello, children. This is the story I call Of Human Bondage. Early in the century, a medical student named Philip was hopelessly in love with Mildred, a girl who sold sandwiches just outside the dissection lab. She had a terrible disposition, and her face looked like something that had been dropped on the floor of a biology class. And there was one other reason why Philip loved her. She enjoyed pretending that he was an intern and that she was his first patient. This worked out fine until one day, while he was taking her temperature, suddenly she bit off the end of his thermometer and died of mercury poisoning.
Thank you, story lady. Be with us next time, boys and girls, when the story lady will tell us about the time Herb Alpert blew a cold sore off his lip. And now it's time, boys and girls, for another visit with the story lady.
Hello, children. This is the story I call The Flunking Scholar. Once upon a time, there was an unhappy boy who was not only flunking all of his subjects, but he also had short hair. So he felt rejected by his classmates and was very sad. One day in study hall, he was cramming for his finals when a grasshopper sprang through the window and landed on his desk. Instead of pinching its little head off the way the other boys would, he stroked its stomach in a friendly way. "For your kindness," said the grasshopper, "I'll stay with you and see that you get the best grades in class." And with that, the grasshopper hopped up on his shoulder. After final exams, the boy got his grades and was surprised to see that they were all F's. The grasshopper then admitted that he hated all little boys and proceeded to squirt grasshopper pyuck on his entire person.
Thank you, story lady. Next time, boys and girls, the story lady will tell us the story of Lester, the boy who smelled from smoked fish. And now, boys and girls, it's time for the story lady.
Hello, children. Today we'll hear the story I call The Sea Wolf. One evening, just outside San Francisco Bay, Wolf Larsen, a sea captain, rescued a drowning swimmer named Vandola. After forcing Vandola to become cabin boy, he steered his ship to the fishing grounds off Alaska. One afternoon, while trolling for barracuda, Vandola accidentally caught a lovely mermaid who was all blue and wrinkled from the cold, and he reeled her in. But Wolf the captain tried to throw her back, and this angered Vandola so much that he hit Wolf Larsen over the head with a bilge rat and put him in irons. Vandola then used the little mermaid for bait while trolling, and together he caught the biggest barracuda of the season.
Thank you, story lady. Next time, boys and girls, the story lady will tell us about a professional bell ringer who became all tangled up in his rope and got told off. Ooh. Time now for another visit with the story lady.
Hello, children. Today I'd like to tell you the story I call The Girl Who Cried Wolf. Once upon a time, a shepherd girl ran down into the nearby village yelling, "Wolf, wolf!" When the villagers followed her back to where her sheep were, they didn't see any wolf at all. About a week later, the shepherd girl was watching the sheep cavort about the pasture around her when she glanced up and saw a menacing creature looking down from a nearby hilltop. Frightened, she raced once again toward the village. "Wolf, wolf!" she cried. Suspiciously, the villagers followed the young shepherd girl back to the scene. But again they saw no wolf, only a bunch of dead sheep. "Darn it, kid," said the head villager. "When are you going to stop messing around? You know, someday, if there really is a wolf, you're going to be in a whole lot of trouble."
Thank you, story lady. Be with us next time, boys and girls, when the story lady demonstrates against peace. Time now, boys and girls, for another visit with the story lady.
Hello, boys and girls. Today's story is one I call The Real King. Once upon a time, there was a boy named Jonathan. His father was a very poor blacksmith. When Jonathan was only 9 years old, his father took him aside and told him that he was not really a blacksmith, but a king who had been deposed by an evil baron, and that Jonathan was in reality a prince who would someday reclaim his throne for his father. For 10 long years, Jonathan's father taught him swordsmanship and horsemanship. Finally, Jonathan was ready. And so one bright autumn day, Jonathan began his gallop through the town. He rode proudly through the streets in full armor, proclaiming, "My father's the king, my father's the king, and I am the prince." Well, Jonathan went about 11 blocks before he was quietly seized and put away, since this whole story took place in Cleveland in 1957.
Thank you, Story Lady. Be listening next time, boys and girls, when the Story Lady tells us the tale of the little boy who drank chicken gumbo from his mucklucks. Time now, boys and girls, for another visit with the Story Lady.
Today's story is one I call Jane Eyre. Once upon a time, there was a young woman who came to a huge estate in England where a very wealthy man lived. Jane worked there as a governess for his daughter. But from the very first day she came to work, the master told Jane that she was never to go into the room on the top floor at the end of the corridor in the east wing. After a while, Jane's curiosity got the best of her. So one night, she stole the master's key and sneaked up to the forbidden room. Nervously, she opened the lock and pushed open the great big door. Just then, the master showed up, but it was too late, for there in the room, Jane saw a glassy-eyed, tousled woman chained to the wall. The astounded Jane turned to the master and gasped, "My goodness, is she mad?" And he replied, "No, but she's getting a bit perturbed."
Thank you, Story Lady. Be sure and tune in next time, boys and girls, when the Story Lady will hippity-hop to the barber shop. Time now for another visit with the Story Lady.
Hello, children. Today we're going to hear the story I call The Magic Suitcase. Once upon a time, a traveler in a strange land far, far away happened upon a wizard who had fallen down into a ditch. The traveler helped the wizard from the ditch, and the wizard said to him, "Thank you, kind sir. I will give you a great gift that will show my gratitude for your kindness before you return to your own land. Here is a magic suitcase. You have but to close the suitcase, and when you open it again, it will be filled with diamonds, rubies, and emeralds." The traveler took the suitcase, and when he opened it, it was indeed filled with precious jewels. And so he took the suitcase and headed back for his own land, filled with joy, but he was arrested and thrown into jail when he tried to pass customs.
Thank you, Story Lady. Be listening next time, boys and girls, when the Story Lady tells us the tale of the whirling dervish whose pants fell off. Now, once again, it's time for a visit with the Story Lady.
Hello, kiddies. Today I'd like to tell you the story I call The Princess and the Pig. Once upon a time, a beautiful princess was walking through the forest near the castle of her father, the king, when all of a sudden she saw a forlorn little pig sitting on a flat rock. She leaned over, picked up the sad piggy, and gave it a big kiss. Instantly, in place of the pig, there appeared a handsome young prince. Without a second thought, the princess grabbed the prince by the hand and rushed him to the castle, where she bade her father's prime minister to marry them. After the usual preliminaries, the prime minister quickly got to the end of the ceremony and asked, "Do you, beautiful princess, take this man to be your lawful wedded husband?" "I do," said the princess. "And do you," said the prime minister to the young man, "take this woman to be your lawful wedded wife?" "Oink," said the prince.
Thank you, Story Lady. Be with us next time, boys and girls, when the Story Lady tells us about the time her ponytail got caught in a mop squeezer.